Chapter 21 of Victories, Part 1. Chaos had befallen Frieseland. The barons had all but crushed resistance outside the inner wall. Only a few remaining pockets of bluecoats continued to fight, their final struggles marked by the crackle of their guns and the thin white clouds left behind by their powder. The rest had all either surrendered or retreated deeper into the city, leaving the Baron troops to stream through the streets in their vibrant liveries. Most remained in the shadows of their banners, guided by the shouts of their commanders. Some broke off in small groups to loot and pillage, breaking through the hastily barricaded doors of homes and shops as the panicked denizens within fled through back exits, leaving only broken wares and fresh fires behind. Even with those opportunists abandoning their ranks, the invading force was thick enough to fill the streets. They towed in cannons and tore apart the wooden mansions in the outskirts, gathering the material in courtyards to form the skeletal outlines of battering rams. The barons had made their breakthrough, and they were wasting no time preparing for the next stage of the siege. On the wall, the Frieselanders, unwilling to bombard their own city, had abandoned their massive cannons in favor of their rifles. Marksmares poked out all along the old crenellations, throwing scattered shots at the troops below with bitterly hissed insults, though few landed on target. Reinforcements trickled in to fill the gaps, but the sense of desperation on the wall was tangible. With so many troops occupied taming the protests in the city center, there simply weren't enough hooves to spare. Rarity took it all in with a grim frown as she stood atop the wall, the hot wind from below drying her mane hairs and drawing a thin sheen of sweat on her forehead. Bodies surrounded the breaches along the city border, with even more abandoned in alleys and on street corners. How many lives had been lost while she struggled within the walls? And what of the violence she had caused herself, threatening the city from inside and making it easier for the besieging army to go about its gruesome work? She pursed her lips and took a deep breath, the tang of smoke stinging her nostrils. Focusing on her failures would accomplish nothing. She had given the ponies of Frieseland her best, truly, everything she had. And that was all that could be asked of her. Now, she would give them peace. Rarity looked to each of her friends in turn. Pinkie Pie on her left, bruised and dirtied, and yet still bouncing in excitement, her wooden wheels clattering against the stone. Pontius stood on her right, his head held high as if to challenge any Frieselanders that might think to move against him or his wife. Rarity brushed a hoof over his, drawing his attention and giving him a grateful smile. And he smiled back, the expression immediately shattering his cold facade. Whitehorn stood apart from the three with his eyes on the city, expression distant, but he turned and gave her a small, reassuring nod when he felt her gaze on him. Governor Rhea was there as well, darkly surveying the streets below. Slowly, she looked up to Rarity, lips twitching. After several seconds, she looked away, waving a hoof to signal her consent. Rarity's horn glowed, and the soft tinkling of her magic filled the air behind them as a long white flag floated off the stones. She let out a shaky, relieved breath as she watched the flag catch the wind, rippling with her magic. The sunlight filtering through her aura from the west turned it from pale blue into a twinkling rainbow. A chorus of cheers rose up from below. Around the jubilant Baron troops, bluecoats fell against their positions with sighs or curses, some glaring hatefully down at the invaders, while others looked to their peers with hesitant smiles. The hard part Rarity hoped, was over. Now, she just had to somehow broker a lasting peace. "We should go," Whitehorn said, beckoning towards the door to the nearest tower. "If we're quick, we can begin negotiations today." Governor Rhea narrowed her eyes.
"I see no need to rush the imminent destruction of my city."
Whitehorn answered her with a disarming smile. "Governor, our only goal here is to bring peace back to your city as soon as possible. I'd hope you're not the type of mayor to delay out of petty spite, but if you are, we can walk as slow as you wish. One day won't make a difference." Rhea's lip curled back, and she brushed past Whitehorn with a sharp whip of her tail. With a quick glance back to Rarity, Whitehorn followed. Pinky let out a strained whine.
That wasn't very nice of him.
Pontius grunted. "You've defeated the city with fair sagecraft. It's unbecoming for her to act so foolish."
"Sympathy, darling,"
Rarity chided.
"I'm sure she's doing her best to carry herself with grace, but I don't envy her position. Though I also don't appreciate Whitehorn prodding at her. Now come along, our job hasn't finished yet."
Rarity followed after Whitehorn and Rhea with a measured gait, her two companions at her sides. No doubt Titus would be his usual bull-headed self at the negotiation table, but she wouldn't allow him to jeopardize the peace with his brutishness. She had tamed the city. Now she would tame the barons.
"This is it?"
Rainbow narrowed her eye as she peered through the long window of the Argo's observation deck. The glass was already collecting frost along the edges, and was cold to the touch. She raised a hoof to the smooth surface, feeling the chill against her skin. A shiver ran down her spine, but not from the cold. Beside her, Applejack pursed her lips.
"It's so empty."
There was no other way to describe it. They had finally reached the ice sheet marked as the gray on all their charts, but after traveling for so long with only the frozen north as a destination, Rainbow had come to the realization that the frozen north was a very big and very featureless place. The ice went on as far as she could see, stretching endlessly across a barren horizon and gleaming with reflected sunlight. Only scattered islands of dead rocks, the peaks of towering northern mountains that trumped even the Canterhorn in height, dared to rise above the surface, the once mighty giants reduced to craggy hills, buried under a glistening blanket of wet snow. The hiss of steam from behind drew both mares' attention, and they turned to see the rest of the crew filing in. Sea Saber led the way, her lips set in the same stern frown she'd worn since agreeing to continue further north.
"Good. You two are already here."
Saber took a position near one of the corners, spinning to face the rest of the room.
"We need to discuss our next move."
"Don't see what the rush is," Flint grumbled as he set his cider down on the pool table. "We had a good game going."
"The rush is that we're in the middle of what is most likely the most dangerous region of Equestria, with no clear destination and only a vague sense of an objective."
Saber turned to Rainbow and Applejack.
"Twilight told you to meet her in the frozen north, and here we are. If you have suggestions for where we go from here, I'm listening."
Well,
Rainbow let out a dry laugh as she glanced out the window.
I was kinda hoping it would, just be obvious when we got here.
"There's nothing here but ice,"
Sunfeather said, nodding towards the window.
"It's not good for the gears."
To be frank, I reckon Twilight didn't quite know what she was looking for up here neither,"
Applejack said.
Whatever it is, we'll have to find it the same way she does.
Something tells me that mare's got a few tricks we don't, Flint said. The gray's huge, Even at searching above the ice, there's no telling how long it'd take, or if we've got supplies to last.
Saber nodded. And we can't dive to search underwater. We might be able to crack the ice from above, but the submarine would be trapped under a fresh layer before we even reached the sea floor.
Trails raised a hoof.
I might be able to scan under the ice from above. And with all those mountain peaks out there, I could even reach the bottom around them. Well, didn't you say it would have taken you days just to scan Ponyville?
Rainbow Dash asked. She let out a frustrated huff.
We have so much more ground to cover here.
Maybe if we wait, Twa'll come to us?
Applejack suggested.
We're not going to just wait,
Saber said.
Anything could be lurking here, maybe even capable of threatening an airship. And that's assuming that Twilight didn't die en route.
Rainbow stomped a hoof.
She wouldn't!
The room fell silent as Rainbow glared into Saber's calm red eyes, daring the other Pegasus to repeat herself. Trails cleared her throat.
Dash, we can't.
No! Rainbow snarled.
She wouldn't leave us. After everything she's been through, everything we've been through, I refuse to think for even a second that she'd let herself die. I'm never giving up on her.
Flint snorted. That ain't how death works.
I don't care.
Rainbow's tail flicked out behind her as she stalked past the rest of the crew, ears flat against her head.
You guys can do whatever you want, but I'm going out looking for her.
The door hissed open, and Rainbow pushed through the swirling steam without looking back or waiting for any response. What did it matter what they said anyways? The only thing they could do was keep looking, and she could cover more ground than any airship and faster. A cocky smirk came over her as she quickened her pace. She'd probably find Twilight and get back before they even finished arguing over what to do. She made a beeline for the cargo hold, fluttering up to her cloud room and grabbing her wing blades off their rack. They might slow her down a little and make it harder to fly, but Saber's warning about the potential dangers of the ice still lingered in the back of her mind. She secured each blade tightly before making a few experimental flaps of her wings, testing the reassuring weights. Her ears twitched at the sound of the door opening, followed by Applejack's concerned voice calling up at her.
Rainbow? Y'all left yet?
Not yet.
Rainbow poked her head out of her doorway with a suspicious frown.
But that doesn't mean you can stop me.
Applejack rolled her eyes.
Artie, you know I'm on y'all's side in all this, right?
Yeah, but sometimes you've got a real weird idea of what being on my side means.
It means I want to find Twi just as much as you do.
Applejack snapped.
But it's just about killing me seeing y'all like this all the time. I know you're upset, Artie, but you ain't gonna get anything done if you keep pushing ponies away.
We don't have time for this.
Rainbow jumped down to the floor below, jerking her head to the side.
Let me go.
Applejack grimaced.
Oh, come on, Philly. Let's talk it all out with the others before you go flying off into who knows what.
Her voice grew strained.
What am I supposed to do if you don't come back?
Rainbow blinked. Her shoulders slumped as the realization sunk in that Applejack wasn't trying to keep her from saving Twilight. She was just worried. Rainbow stepped forwards and pulled Applejack into a tight hug.
I'll be careful. But I have to do this.
Applejack sighed as she returned the hug.
Yeah, I get you. Hang on just a sec.
Pulling out of the hug, Applejack trotted for her room, disappearing through the curtained doorway. She came out a few seconds later with a thick gray scarf in her muzzle, which she deftly wrapped around Rainbow's neck. Rainbow looked down. The scarf was broad enough to cover her shoulders entirely, and it hung down just past her knees.
Oh, what the hey, AJ? This thing is huge.
She wrinkled her nose up at the faint smell of oil hanging on the fabric.
And what's with the smell?
It's, it's Flint's.
Applejack let out a dry laugh.
Seeing as we're up in the cold and all, and neither of us really put much thought or money into our wardrobes, so he, figured I could use it.
Rainbow arched her brow as she looked up, seeing the slight blush on her friend's cheeks.
So, are you two, like, a thing now, or?
Oh, concern it, Rainbow. Stallion can give his mare friend a scarf without getting all romantic like.
Applejack snorted, adding in a quiet grumble.
I reckon even Winona couldn't find a romantic bone in that pony's body.
Rainbow blinked.
You said mare friend.
Oh, land sakes, I'm his friend and I'm a mare. There's a gap between them words.
Applejack grabbed Rainbow's shoulders, pushing her towards the door.
Don't you got somewhere you want to be? Or did you want to sit around talking about my love life all day?
The pipes vented steam as the door clunked open, and Rainbow grinned as she let the flustered cowpony shove her out into the hall.
So you admit that Flint's involved in your love life?
I ain't admitting nothing.
Applejack stepped back, giving an exaggerated wave as the door began to shut between them.
Bah! Be careful, don't do anything you'd normally do.
Rainbow snickered into her hoof as she turned away, making for the nearest hatch. She still wasn't sure how she felt about a pony like Flintlock being close with one of her best friends, but it was fun to tease her over it either way. Taking a quick moment to adjust the scarf around her shoulders, Rainbow reached up and spun the hatch open, revealing the open bay where the ship's submarine was secured. The cold Arctic wind rushed in without hesitation, and she was thankful for Applejack's gift as she stepped onto the narrow catwalk outside and locked the hatch shut behind her. Now out in the open, Rainbow stepped into open air. The roar of the Argo's propeller was ripped away by the whistling of the icy wind, and after a couple seconds of freefall, Rainbow spread her wings and pulled up into an easy glide. She took a deep breath, adjusting to the shock of the cold air in her lungs as the Argo drifted gradually away. It was still moving, but she had spent all her youth in a moving cloud city. Finding the ship again later barely even registered to her as an inconvenience. Within seconds, the sound of the engine had faded into a distant buzz, and soon even that was inaudible under the gusting wind. The cold air slipped between her feathers and nipped at her hooves, but she knew how to deal with the chill of altitude. Her wings pumped at her sides, driving her over the featureless ice and stoking the warmth of exercise in her veins. She kept her eyes on the distant line where the white ice met the pale blue sky, scanning in either direction and squinting to see through the mist of her breath. She traded height for speed, looking down to scan the black faces of each craggy island as she passed for any sign of life or color. Nothing. Rainbow didn't have the best sense of time, but she was intimately familiar with the strain each mile traveled put on her body. After the first 10, she tilted her wings to the right, leaning into a gentle northward turn. Was there some pattern she could discern from the islands? She knew they had to be the peaks of submerged mountains, so perhaps she could find some hint in their formation. Maybe she could find a ridgeline and go to search the valley beside it, or she could follow it until she found something. The wind shifted, whipping her scarf across her vision, and she stopped to shake it free with a frustrated scowl. She turned a slow circle, eyeing each island carefully. Nothing. She gave a vicious shake of her head. Twilight was the smart one, not her. Maybe if she was here, she'd be able to find the clues Rainbow needed. Maybe it was even how she'd found the way to whatever hidden key was waiting for her among the ice. Rainbow's scowl turned to a grimace. What if the mountains were the only clue? And they'd never find where Twilight went because Twilight was the only one smart enough to decipher it.
No, you're being stupid.
Rainbow shook herself before pumping her wings once more, muttering under her breath.
You'll find her. You're the most awesome pony in Equestria. It's just a matter of time.
20 more miles rolled beneath her, and Rainbow still saw nothing but rock and ice. She was facing east now, and the sun cast long shadows before her. For a brief, insane moment, Rainbow imagined herself as the last pony alive, a mare on an unending quest to fly the breadth of the entire frozen north, driven to an impossible task by her unwavering determination. Was this how the last survivors of Cloudsdale had felt? Everything she'd ever heard in the future indicated that the Great Cloud City had been destroyed along with the rest of Equestria, though it didn't make much sense to her. If all of these flying islands could still exist, then surely her home should have survived as well, right? Had the clouds just suddenly fallen apart, leaving all the Pegasi living atop them to fly above the rising ocean until their wings grew too weak to carry them? Even if the city had been destroyed, the population should have been able to take refuge on the leftover clouds. Had some traveling Pegasus returned home only to find empty sky? Maybe they had done the same thing she was doing now, flying endless circles across empty horizons, searching in vain until they finally gave in, until they died alone. Finally, something caught her eye. She slowed, squinting down at what looked like a ring of small pockmarks dug into the ice around one of the rocky islands. She flew lower, and with a start she realized that what she was seeing weren't pockmarks, but the shadows of strange round bumps sticking up. She flew 2 full laps of the island as she bled altitude, observing the bumps from every angle. They looked to be covered in a layer of wet, hardened snow, though she still couldn't make out the details of what lay hidden underneath from so high. There were no markings on the outsides or any other irregularities around them. Taking one last look at the horizon, Rainbow swept in for a landing. The ice was slippery and shockingly cold, and she almost lost her balance before she brought herself to a stop. She kept her wings flared out for stability as she approached the nearest bump, squinting through the mist of her breath. Although they looked relatively small from above, now that she was up close, Rainbow could see that each of these strange shapes was about the size of a small Ponyville cottage. Were these what Twilight was looking for? She glanced back, raising her voice.
Twilight? You here?
Only the wind answered her. She shivered as the chill of the ice crept further up her legs. Pursing her lips, Rainbow turned back to the weird, icy orb in front of her. She lifted a hoof and gave it an experimental tap. Her ear twitched at the faint sound of the impact. Was it hollow? She leaned in, pressing her ear up to the surface. For a moment, she thought she could hear a faint rumbling inside, but it was impossible to tell over the wind and the beating of her own pulse. Pursing her lips, Rainbow pulled her hoof back and struck the ice again, harder. It was definitely hollow. and the rumbling had stopped. A chill crept down Rainbow's spine. An animal instinct reared up from the bottom of her mind, screaming its panic. Fly. Rainbow pushed off with all four hooves just as the ice beneath her blasted apart with an ear-splitting crunch like the breaking of bones. Heavy chunks of ice pelted her belly and her wings, throwing her into a spin, and she cried out as she smacked back into the ice and was sent sliding across the surface. She snapped her wings out, digging the pointed ends of her blades into the ice to arrest her momentum. Using her makeshift ice picks for support, she shakily climbed back to her hooves and turned to face her attacker. Still half submerged in the water, all Rainbow could see was the massive pair of chipped horns sticking out of its head. A thick curtain of sleek hair drooped down over its face and much of its body, hiding the details of its form, but she could still see the pairs of blunt, hooked claws on the ends of its forelegs as it dragged itself onto the ice. Rainbow's eye widened as it drew up to its full height, at least 3 times her size. It paused, sizing her up as it drew heavy, rattling breaths. She pulled her blades out of the ice and spread her stance, waiting for it to make a move. The beast snorted, stomping on the ice before it and sending long cracks across the surface. Rainbow's tail lashed out behind her as she scratched at the ice with a foreleg, flaring her wings.
You think you can scare me?
Rainbow let her anger slip into her voice as she shouted her challenge.
Come on! Step closer, see what happens!
The beast roared as it charged, the ice crunching beneath it with each step as it hooked in with its long claws and threw itself forward. It moved surprisingly fast, crossing a huge distance with each bound. But Rainbow was faster. She flew up and to the side, dodging around the blood-stained tip of its horn as it tried to gore her, and raked her blade along its body. She grinned as she felt the resistance of its flesh against her wing, and heard its pained howl in her ears, only for her expression to falter as the thing dug its claws into the ice and turned on the spot. It charged her again, the thick ice spiderwebbing in its wake, and she just managed to fly up out of its reach as it passed through the air where she had been hovering. A sharp crunch reached her ears, and Rainbow twisted to see that the monster had embedded its horns into one of the pale orbs rising up from the ice. It snorted and stomped, sending shards of ice flying around it as it tried to free itself, but Rainbow didn't wait for it to succeed. She snarled as she darted down onto its back, drawing another dry roar from its throat as her hooves struck the coarse flesh around its shoulders and drew her wing blades back for a killing blow at its neck. Just as she was about to strike, the monster jumped, forcing her to use her wings just to stay balanced atop it. Its horns remained stuck on the ice, but when its massive weight crashed back down, the ice underneath it gave way. Rainbow yelped as the jolt of the impact raced up her hooves. She lowered herself against the monster's back instinctively, and still recovering from the sudden shift, she felt icy water rising around her legs. A shuddering gasp escaped her. It felt like her legs were on fire, and the shock of the sheer cold overwhelmed her. She blinked, and she was underwater, looking up at a jagged hole in meter-thick ice, every muscle seizing up with debilitating shivers.
No!
Her hooves were caught in the knotted hair of the monster beneath her, dragging her deeper into the killing ice.
I can't die here!
Clenching her jaw, Rainbow focused on the fiery anger rising up inside her. It would be so stupid to die like this. To survive so much, to come so far, to cross such a distance searching for Twilight, only to be killed by some stupid monster. It couldn't even beat her. She had had it dead to rights, and she wasn't going to let it kill her on accident. She couldn't leave her friends behind. She wasn't going to die like this. Bubbles flurried around her as she let out an enraged roar, channeling all of her willpower into moving her wings. Her Pegasus magic wrapped around her, prying the icy fingers from her bones. It was enough to keep the worst of the shivering at bay, and Rainbow's legs began to respond again. She pulled them free from the monster's hair, her eye focused on the circle of light above her even as darkness crept into the corners of her vision. She pushed herself up with every limb, every muscle focused on the singular goal of rising her out from the darkness. Something caught her tail. Her fury redoubled. She screamed with the last of her breath, reaching back with a wing and slicing through the long rainbow hairs. Free of any grip, Rainbow rocketed up towards the surface. A thin coat of ice had already reformed on top of the water, but she didn't waver. She crashed through the ice and out into open air, opening her lips to gasp in a deep, freezing breath. Rainbow tried to flap her wings and gain more altitude, but now her muscles were burning both from the cold of the water and the exertion of her escape. The best she could do was extend her wings out and try to catch the air, but the soaked feathers did little to slow her fall. She grunted as her hooves skidded over the ice and pain flared up her legs, but the sound of ice crunching behind her promised that if she stopped, she would die. Over the chattering of her teeth, the heaving of her breath, and the rush of her blood, she heard the monster roaring behind her, and she could feel the impact of its claws as it chased her through the pale mist hanging over the ice. Of course, she could never beat this thing in a hoof race. She could feel it closing the gap with each crashing bound. She just had to stay ahead of it for long enough that she could dry her wings and take flight. She pumped them as she ran, both propelling her forward and flinging off excess moisture with every flap.
Come on, Rainbow!
She shifted her weight forwards, throwing herself across the ice almost too fast for her to keep her hooves under her.
You're not dying here! You have to save Twilight! You have to kill Gava!
Her lips twisted into a snarl at the thought of the griffin's sneering beak, and the rest of the world began to bleed away. It was just her, the monster, and the image of the creature she hated more than anything waiting in the distance, looking back with a cocky smirk. Rainbow's drying wings began to catch the air. Her steps became longer as each flap began to push her off the ground. The shadow of the monster's horns fell over her. She cried out as she set her hooves, coiled up, and jumped. A horn scraped against her leg, drawing a hiss of pain as she beat her wings and fled into the sky. Rainbow clawed for altitude, spurred on by the ragged roars from beneath. When she finally felt safe enough to turn and look at the monster, it was jumping and stomping in frustration far below her. It hurt to laugh, but she embraced the pain. Rainbow winced at the stinging in her lungs as she pointed a shaky hoof down at the thing.
Thought you could catch me, huh? Nothing can catch Rainbow Dash. Oh, it's cold.
Rainbow grimaced as she wrapped her hooves around herself, the shivers returning to full strength now that the immediate danger was gone. With a groan of dismay, she realized that she had lost the scarf Applejack had given her during the fighting, leaving her body bare to the elements. She really needed to get back to the Argo. She turned a slow circle, ignoring the continued complaints of the monster beneath her. She wasn't sure exactly what direction she had run in after nearly drowning, or how far, but if she found the weird ice orbs, then she'd be able to get her bearings. She flew higher, warming herself with the heat from her muscles. A glow appeared on the horizon, opposite the sun. Rainbow frowned as she focused on it, flying higher. Slowly, the light seemed to lengthen, and with a blink of realization, she saw that it was some kind of tall, slender structure, catching the sun's brilliance and reflecting it back on the ice all around it. As she climbed higher, farther from the reflective ice, she began to make out details. The strange beacon was some kind of massive spire, a facade of blue crystal towering over its surroundings. And then she saw the balloon of an airship crest the horizon, trailing tendrils of swirling purple smoke as it circled the tower.
That's where we need to be.
Rainbow turned away sharply, her near-death experience forgotten as she pushed herself through the sky with fresh energy. She needed to get her bearings, get back to the Argo, and lead it here. Twilight needed her, and Rainbow Dash never left a friend hanging.